My name's Will Wakeling. I'm the Dean of Libraries here, and I'm happy to welcome you to this really special event in the Libraries Meet the Author series. It's a special occasion. It's the first time we've done one of these events associated with Parents' Weekend, and I think it's going to be a landmark. But first of all, let me give some thanks, and thank particularly the members of the Library's Programming and Communications Committee for their work organising the event. And also let me thank the NU Bookstore as well, our perennial co-sponsor in this series, our generous co-sponsor. And one final thanks to another co-sponsor, Northeastern's Office of Admissions, whom you could see would naturally have an interest in an occasion like this one. If you've not been to one of these events before, and I guess that may be true of many of you, let me tell you about the Meet the Author series. It showcases authors whose works address current events and preoccupations, social, aesthetic issues, and it brings together faculty, students, staff, and friends to debate and discuss these issues. So we'll certainly be making sure that there's time this morning for some Q&A, assuming our guest author is happy to do so. Good, thank you. Now, you can support programs like this Meet the Author series yourselves very practically by becoming a member of the Library Supporters group. Okay, we have a group called the Library Supporters, and you'll find and hear all the details of the events going on in the library. There are people here moving amongst you, library staff, who can tell you about this. We also have a place on our library website where you can find out more about the supporters. So let me encourage you to sign up for that and get more information about the sort of things that we're doing, important things that we're doing here in the library at Northeastern. Okay, now we do have a really wonderful event this morning. And I must say the organising committee has outdone itself this time in matching a distinguished author to the Parents' Weekend occasion itself. So we wish a very timely and special welcome to our guest, Dr. Ruth Nemzoff. Ruth has schlepped all the way from Newton, I believe, to talk to us today, and about her latest book, Don't Bite Your Tongue. And I'll get the plug in early as well as later. You have an opportunity to buy a copy, and a signed copy no less, that will of course accrue in value over the years, such that it'll become a great heirloom to the family. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Ruth, you said you have another similar appointment, speaking appointment tomorrow at Tufts at their Parents' Weekend as well. So there's obviously a career path here that could pay off in the longer term. Anyhow, if you don't know it already, this is a wonderful and unusual book about parenting adult children. It counters the popular belief that parents must let go of their adult children and silence themselves. The book focuses on the continually lengthening period when both parents and their children are relatively healthy adults, and it homes in on the positive ways parents and adult children can add meaning to each other's lives. So this is important stuff, right? Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about Ruth herself. She's a resident scholar at Brandeis University's Women's Studies Research Center, and she's an adjunct assistant professor at Bentley College. She lectures on family dynamics. Her papers are archived at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard University, where she also holds a doctorate in social policy. She's served 3 terms on the New Hampshire legislature and was New Hampshire's Deputy Commissioner of Health and Welfare. And somewhat to the point, I think you'll agree, she's the mother of 4 adult children. I think we'll probably hear more about them. I will say my son thought he'd developed a foolproof way of avoiding having to answer phone calls from my wife and I by moving to Sydney, Australia. And then we discovered text messaging. Anyhow, enough of that. Our guest speaker, Ruth Nemzoff. Okay, have you got a pocket for this? There we go.
Great, thank you. Okay, can everyone hear? Yes, I always say I suffer from Bill Clinton's problems, but it's not the fun one of running around the office with interns. It's his propensity toward laryngitis. Well, I first want to begin by congratulating you all. because you have done it. You have gotten your kids this far. And it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of nights, and it took a lot of diaper changes, and you deserve a lot of credit. So I want to begin with that. Now, what I thought we'd spend our time here doing is, first of all, talking about the period emerging adulthood. My book focuses on the whole, many more things, but today I'm just going to focus on emerging adulthood, which is the phase that your children are in, and talk a little bit about why it's so difficult and so ambiguous. And secondly, we're going to talk about the difference between helping and hovering. And see, we have some recognition there. There are constantly articles about hovering. I even brought one from last week or the week before's Boston Sunday Globe. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some ways to make vacations a little bit easier. And then, of course, questions and answers. So let's begin. This is a very, very difficult time of life. And the reason it's difficult is it's extremely ambiguous. We don't know when childhood ends and adulthood begins. All the markers that used to mark adulthood no longer work. So it used to be graduation. You were an adult. But now, many adults go back to school, and many kids drop out, then go back to school. We also find that the marker of supporting yourself with the expensive education, with continuing lengthening trainings in careers, that one can be fully adult in some ways and yet dependent on the family dole in others. So it's all extremely ambiguous. We even dress the same. So we don't know who's an adult. Our kids are wearing jeans, we're wearing jeans. Our kids wear heels, our grandchildren are wearing heels, right? So it's very ambiguous, and we're uncertain what exactly is adulthood. So no wonder we're confused, right? But of course, we're confused by other things. First of all, the colleges themselves. I'll notice on college websites, they will say, they will talk about your child as an adult. They will tell you they'll send your child the bill. And then in the next paragraph, they'll say something like, and families are welcome to come into counseling to figure out how you can pay this bill, right? Or you all know, you've just been through it, right, that you've had to send your child is going to college, but it's your financials that have decided on what the scholarships and tuitions will be. So again, an ambiguity. Another ambiguity is that the Federal Education Act of 1974 suggested, FERPA it's called, that it has protected our children's right to privacy, which is wonderful. Their records, their medical records are sealed, they have the right to them, and they also have the right to their grades, and you don't. However, that's one side of the story. On the other side of the story, we know you are either paying out of pocket or paying out of missed opportunity. Your children aren't earning money to send your kids to schools, and yet you don't have the right to their records. And I know as a professor, occasionally, fortunately not often, but occasionally I get a student and I just want to call up the parents and say, you know what, you're paying a lot of money for your kid to drink. You know, send him to work for a couple of years and then send him back. But I don't have the right to do that, right? So again, this is ambiguous. We saw, of course, in the Virginia Tech shooting that the parents didn't have full access to the children's records. So it's the mental health records. So on the one hand, you want your children to have the right and the freedom to get the medical attention they want, and you don't want them to be hampered by feeling that, oh my God, my parents will know. On the other hand, sometimes we need to know that. So it's kind of ambiguous. Now, to top it off, every state agency, or many state agencies, have different rules about what adulthood is. So even between states, there's a difference. So at 16 in some states, you can drive a car. In others, it's 16 and a half. In others, it's 18. So even a very simple mark of adulthood, i.e. the freedom to drive a car, is ambiguous. And then, of course, between state agencies or federal government, there are different rules. We don't know when adulthood begins. At 18, you can sign contracts, you can go into the Army, but it really isn't until 21 that you can drink and also become a fully recognized adult in this society as a whole. So if you're confused, you got reasons to be confused, so don't worry about it. So what does that mean? That leads for all of us to have some concerns about what exactly is, our role. What should we do in this? We don't know when our kids are dependent, when they're independent. And I would say that during this period, our task is a complicated one, and I will read from Don't Bite Your Tongue, which I learned from the Gwen Eiffel look-alike on Saturday Night Live that you're supposed to show your book, right? Okay. The post-high school years are a tricky period for the parent-child relationship. Children step out, assert their independence, and choose cities and friends, all without supervision. Everything is up for grabs. Parents see their authority diminishing, while children are making decisions that will have consequences for the rest of their lives. Parents feel left out, or at least uncertain, and in some areas of the child's lives, they're called upon for solace and support, and in others, they're not even consulted. Kids switch between being very adult and rather childish, and parents fluctuate between wanting to protect their children, as they've always done, and believing they should let them spread their wings and make decisions for themselves. There's no consistency. Neither parent nor child knows what is independence and what is dependence. Both are trying to determine the role for parents in the lives of the adult children. The next few years will be a quest to figure this out. And I might say it's more than just a few years. There is a continuing lengthening period. Many of our children will take the scenic road to adulthood. And it may take many years that you'll still be figuring this out. And of course, in our children, one of the complexities is that many of our children had these incredible experiences, professional experiences. Some of your children probably have started their business already, and they're doing website design, and they're making a fortune. It should only be all our children, right? Or they've lived abroad, but many of them have never really control their own life, so that they're very mature in some areas and not in others, as I said before. Now, to make this even more complex, within each of us, there's both an adult and a child. And of course, road rage and supermarket checkout counter rudeness are examples of this, right? So we often act from our most childish source instead of our most mature source. And it's also very complicated by the many of the things we hoped and dreamed for our children. When they actually happen, our feelings are kind of mixed. So we might be thrilled that they've got this marvelous significant other. On the other hand, that means they're spending less time with you. And that may kind of be tough to handle. We are the same, we're thrilled that they're going to the university, but maybe some of us didn't have that opportunity. And there's certain jealousies around that, or their junior year abroad, or some of the internships they'll have. And so our own feelings are very ambiguous, and so we need to kind of look at those and really be sure that we understand ourselves, because one thing I know is children are brilliant psychologists about their parents. They know us well, and we cannot pull the wool over their eyes. And so when we need to acknowledge those and just let them know that we're feeling some of those things. So, again, those are some of the complexities that we're dealing with, and of course we are slow to change. We are used to protecting them, we want to protect them, we're used to taking care of them, and yet we have to learn new skills too. And as we do this, we can ask them for their help and advice, and hopefully they will give that to us. So, what I'd like to just talk to you about, what are we looking for? And I think many people will say, well, I want to be my child and I want to be friends. That's my goal, to be friends. And in some ways, this relationship can be like a friendship. But unlike a friendship, this is a relationship that has a lot of obligation mixed with it. So it's a combination of choice and obligation. Our friends we can ditch and have a perfectly happy life afterwards. But even you all know people who haven't talked with their parents in years, and yet still that relationship is they talk about it, they obsess about it, they feel badly about it. And so this is a relationship that has tremendous psychological meaning. But we also need this relationship. We want this relationship, but we also need it. And we need it because, in fact, the generations are each other's social safety net. I recently did a session at a psychiatrist's office, and it was a small group session. People are introducing themselves. Hello, my name is, and one person says, my name is whatever her name was, and I am here because my mother just moved in. She's finding it hard to manage her house, so she's moved in with me. The woman next to her said, my name is, and my daughter just moved in because she just went through a divorce. So I think, I hate to bring up the economy, everyone's feeling good, I'm about to give you a stomach ache here, but I think we're going to all have to deal with more and more of how the generations are going to be interdependent. Now, fortunately, many of you have already had discussions about finances. You've had to, as you decided to go to college, right? You fund your child for college. Discussions about what schools they could apply to, because maybe some of you were restricted by the cost of the college. Or maybe the distance. Maybe you could afford to help or help them get scholarships and whatever for a local school, but couldn't afford the paying for the living at school or the extra plane fare to go to California or Timbuktu, right? So this talking about money is a very, very important skill. I think many of you have had to do it over this scholarship business, over getting into college, but how do you, on the one hand, do this and yet not micromanage their lives is the question. Because you are all making whatever sacrifices you're making, and they have to be responsible. And so you do need to have these discussions about money, and I do in the book have a whole discussion about talking about money. And then, of course, there are the jealousies within the family, right? So you have one child who was the super student, and you've sent them to a private school, and another child who maybe you decided should go to a vocational school. What is fair? One is much more expensive than the other, and talking about that in the family and deciding how did we make the decision on that and sharing that with your children, because otherwise lots of jealousies can come up. So that question of is it to each according to his or her need, or is it we give the same nickel to each child, is always a question that is open for jealousies and problems within the families. So let's just talk a little more about that some of the things the children are experiencing. They are seeing a whole new world. They are interacting with people from all sorts of different cultures, and they are learning so much, and it's absolutely marvelous. But what happens is when they come home, they see, the way you did it may not be the only way to do it. And there are many good ways to do things. And they will go through a period of judging you and figuring out for themselves, is our way the best way? And in some ways, this is wonderful. And in other ways, it really feels very hurtful, because we hold many things dear, from the food we eat, to our religious beliefs, to just the way we do anything in life. So how do we know the difference between helping and hovering? So as many of you know, there's been a lot of talk about the helicopter parent, right? Now, I personally feel, I'm going to be really honest with you, that this is just the latest version of parent blaming. That, it's a tough job. And there's a very fine line between helping and hovering. And we are going to make mistakes. We've already made mistakes. Anybody? All those who've never made a mistake with your child? One brave guy. So we all really will make mistakes, but we can always do it better. So what are some of the directions I could give to you? Well, one thing I can tell you is if you're writing your students' papers, you're hovering. If you're talking about issues, you're helping. So if a student calls you up, your child calls you up and says, I'm writing a paper on the US government or on whatever, and you say, oh, that's so interesting, I read an article such and such, and you share ideas, that's a wonderful thing. And that's actually a way that you get some of your money's worth out of the college education, right? I love it when my students go home and talk with their parents about what they're learning, because then I feel like, wow, this is great, everybody's learning something. So that's one thing, that you want to help your student, but not do it for them. So then the next question is making decisions. If you're making every decision for them, you're hovering. If, on the other hand, you're asking questions, you're telling your opinion, but being very careful to say, my opinion is one piece of the mix, and you need to explore further. This is very helpful to help students really figure out how do you make decisions, because we all know that being independent isn't just doing it yourself. So how many of you have ever talked about, like, say, a doctor and asked them for advice on your health? Right, we go to the experts, right? We go to a financial person for our financial, questions. So how do we use expertise? And that's one of the things you want to ask them, right? We usually don't have the experts make the decision for us, but we do gather that information. And then the last thing is around money. And this is really tricky. And it will come up a lot. It will come up over what internship should you take, right? Or what are they called here? Co-op, thank you. What co-op? Because some will pay more and others will have more opportunity. And some of us can afford it. For the child to take a greater opportunity for long-term gain, and others of us cannot. So all these discussions are tremendously important, and it's a fine line between controlling and being honest. And one of the things I would say is that every bank, when they give money, expects some sort of collateral, right? And in a certain sense, you act as a bank. And so I would suggest you make the rules clear. There are no rights and wrongs. But if you expect your child to pay you back, you need to make that clear. If you expect your child to finish school with, you need to make that clear. Again, it's okay to put some parameters on things, but you have to discuss them and make sure they're clear, much like as when you go to a bank, okay? So I want to just shift gears here and go to some practical issues, and then I'm going to open it for discussion, because you all came for a reason today, and I think I'd like you to get your reason, solved. So one of the things I always say the lesson before Thanksgiving, when my students, I used to teach freshman government, 8:30 class, most unpopular, required 8:30, oh boy, this was tough teaching, right? I always say to my students, that first weekend when they go home for Thanksgiving, I say, please be kind to your parents, because you have changed. And I say to them, when your parents say to you, what time will you be home? They might be asking, should I leave the light on? And so I just want to read one more paragraph from the book about that experience of coming home and what it's like for you. Kids will come home for a variety of reasons: for short visits, for holidays, for refueling between school and jobs, and for longer stays to save money or because they're down on their luck. Each of these events requires the parent and the child to redefine the dynamic. Often the reunions are fraught with anxiety. Nobody knows which of the old dramas will be played out or whether the family members will be able to learn new roles. The old dictum, you can't go home, is true. Once at home, your kids find they've changed. All the people they left behind seem to have changed, and even the physical space may have changed. Perhaps equally disconcerting, on the surface, so little has changed, when so much has happened inside them in the interim. There is a disconnect between the expectation that their home, as they remembered it, will be waiting there unchanged, and the reality which they thought they'd find is not there. Even the most independent adult child will often fall back into old roles, 1 minute relying on others to do what they've been doing for themselves for months, and the next moment being totally self-sufficient. On the flip side, the parents, whether out of love or habit, often automatically revert to their parental ways. For example, nagging an adult child to do something when the adult child is responsible and mature enough, or should be, to follow through without reminders. So, one of the things I recommend to my students, and I recommend to you, as you know, kids come home, freshmen, that Thanksgiving weekend, and the first thing they do is run out to see their friends. And on the one hand, again, we are thrilled they have friends. On the other hand, we want some time. So I suggest you ask in advance your children, just let them know, I'd like to have some time with you. Okay. My preference is, and you say Thanksgiving dinner at such and such a time, or whatever your preference is, and if that won't work, could we just make sure that we have some time together and set up an appointment? It's funny, when I wrote this book, you have a copy editor, and the copy editor, he's the one who dots the I's and crosses the T's, or she, and in the margin, in this section of the book, he wrote, yeah, my dad used to say, I know, I know the boys are home because the driveway is empty. So one of the other issues is, of course, the younger siblings. Now, the younger siblings, if they're really much younger, and I know that because I have children 16 years apart, are actually standing at the window waiting for the sibling to come home. If 1 or 2 years younger, they might have the bravado, I don't care, right? But in any case, I would suggest that you ask your children to make a date with the younger sibling. And the date can be to play checkers, it can be to go out and have ice cream, it doesn't matter. But it's just that knowledge of, respecting that sibling to say, I'm really going to be, I've got to see my friends, I have to go to the game, but I really want to see you too. And so I urge you, those are just some techniques that are useful and really do smooth over that coming home. So I want to open it up for questions and comments or thoughts. Yes?
And I remembered a wonderful sentence out of your book that says, good relationships aren't necessarily smooth relationships.
Yes.
But a lot of the things you've been talking about have been telling us ways in which to keep things smooth.
I love that, because I think it's so true. Someone just, I had someone at a workshop yesterday, and they mentioned this. They said, how do two porcupines greet each other in the dark? What's the answer? Carefully, right? And that's typically the way parents and children relate. So the relationship will never be without rough edges, right? But the aim is to get it a little smoother, right? So I completely agree. I mean, think of all your other relationships. Do you have, with your spouse or with your significant other, just absolute perfection, never a disagreement? Of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. And none of us do have those kinds of relationships. Human relationships are always ambivalent and will always have rough spots. But we can make them rougher or smoother. We do have some control over that. And that's actually why in the title I use the word, instead of, the name of the book is Don't Bite Your Tongue, How to Foster Rewarding Relationships. I did not use the word create, because I don't think we can create relationships. We're only responsible for one side of that relationship. But we can foster, we can till the soil and make it more fertile. So thank you for clarifying that. Yes?
In your book, do you also talk about fostering that relationship amongst the siblings as they become adults? Because I have 6 years apart. My youngest is 18.
Right.
But the three of them, I think we can also learn how to have adult relationships.
Yes, and I... Oh, so sorry. Thank you. Yes, we have. Good. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how the principles apply to the siblings developing or fostering adult relationships?
Well, clearly I gave you one example how. I do have a whole chapter on triangles, and the triangles are the triangles, mother, child, father, might have step-parents involved, might have in-laws involved, or it may be a triangle with you and the child and the siblings. And I urge you, as the kids get older, to have the children solve their own problems and not be the go-between, because they will come up with creative solutions that you couldn't possibly come up with. Yes?
Just in the last couple of days, case, I've spoken with 3 adult children who have the situation that their parents, that their parents' financial situation is important for their own, even out 30 years, and where they really need to know what their parents' will is and what their net worth is, and they cannot have this conversation. It's very significant for their own financial future, and they can't have it with their own parents because the parents refuse. The parents won't have it. They won't have it, and it just seems like it's a realm where, as parents, we could take some initiative in a really difficult area that the kids would be delighted to have some conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, this is like a plant. I just, you know, I feel so strongly that I have this whole long chapter on discussing money because our children do need to know what we've got and what we don't have. And they need to know not just for themselves, but for us. Because if we get sick, they need to plan. You know, do we have money to take care of ourselves? If not, hopefully they're not going to let us live under a bridge. And so that means they're going to have to be planning ahead for that. And conversely, if something should happen to them, and I hope it doesn't, but we know bad things happen, what have they planned for their children, or what have they planned for their own medical needs, or their own children's needs? Also, if we have families, let's say you have $1 zillion. Let's say we're in that, you know, you happen to be Mr. Buffett's grandchild and you're going here, or a child, and you have a lot of money, and your child is struggling not only to pay the rent but to save money for college when you actually plan in your wills to leave money, they need to know that. Now, most of us are not Warren Buffett, but they need to know what's coming down the pike, because as responsible adults, they need to plan just as we need to plan. And none of us likes to think of our demise, but you know what, folks? It's been happening all throughout history. We do have a demise at some point. So I just, you know, it is so important. And also, you really don't want to leave a will that creates animosity amongst your children if you have more than one. You want to leave one that creates understanding, make it clear what your expectations are. Yes.
If people don't mind coming up here, staying on the topic of the financial situation, how do you get your child to understand budgets and limits? You know, we come from a pretty affluent area where, you know, everyone has a lot of money, and
right.
You know, it's a constant give and take, and my daughter's always saying, but you can afford it. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if we can afford it. You know, you need to learn what you need versus what you want. And I'm always getting it thrown back in my face, you know, like, you know, well, why can't I just, you know, spend whatever? You know, why do you give me a budget all the time? You know, so how, you know, what are some tips for us? Because then I walk away feeling guilty all the time because I can't afford it. But I'm forcing her to, you know, live within a budget.
Well, clearly, you know, we do teach our children a lot, and we have rights to teach our children. And in your case, if you believe that that is important, you have a right to believe that. And I thought you explained it well to your daughter, you know. I do understand that we can afford it, but I also want to teach you values, and I want to teach you something I believe in. And when you are running your own financial system, you can do it your way. But at this point, this is the way I feel about it. You know, you're teaching something. Now, that doesn't mean they love all our teachings, right? Have any of you ever had a child storm out because you taught it teaching, and then they come back years later? Now, if she's earning her own money and is supporting herself completely by herself, that's very different. She has the rights, and adults will differ. And in this very room, we differ on how we spend our money. And adults have that right to differ. But during this ambiguous period, you know, it's complicated, and you can talk about that. The complications of how you feel as a parent, and you can even talk about, I feel guilty because I see your other friends doing it. On the other hand, I also think I'm right, you know. But you can not think I'm right later. You know, and you're going to have that right to do that.
My famous line is I always say to her, you know, I don't care what you do, you know, choose whatever career you want, but don't think you're living with me when you're 30. So, you know, make sure you have
Right.
plans so you can support
Right.
yourself.
By the way, our children, I know from my students, are very anxious right now about money. I mean, they hear the news, whether they read the newspaper or not. They don't, in fact, we know that. But they do see it online, and they do hear, and they're anxious, they're worried, and they have a right to be worried. Because I'm sure you are, too. You know, many of us are. Will we be able to afford this? And you may find that who knows what's going to happen with the economy, but your children may have a very different pattern in college because of what's happening. Fortunately, here at Northeastern, they have the wonderful co-op opportunities, but many kids may be taking a year off, saving every penny, living with you, going back for a year, working, going back. Who knows what's going to happen? So this is a wonderful time to begin talking about the economy itself and then getting into other issues. Her and then her, and then there's someone back there.
Feel free, don't be shy, go right up to the mic.
Yes, that's probably the best way. Yes, yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes.
You touched upon it a little bit about an article, how you talk to your kids when they're first transitioning. I have a freshman boy and a senior boy, as we
Right.
talked about before, and the types of questions you ask. Like sometimes I feel like the senior is pretty good now with conversation. The freshman in college might be getting tired of me asking, how's your roommate? Where do you study? So those types of questions. So eventually, I guess it does work when you're relating to their music, or my husband and I constantly try to stay aware. So it's difficult though making that bridge from asking the questions that you asked about their well-being. Do you stop that eventually, or my 85-year-old mother says just keep asking questions, even if the guys are quiet?
Right. Well, I think our relationships are always a combination of asking about with interest in one's life and just having good times together. It may be that for a period you just want to have a good time together. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be a walk in the woods. It can be walking around campus together. It can be talking on the telephone. It can be anything. And in fact, one of the chapters in the book is about communication. And I talk about, you know, despite the fact the title of the book is Don't Bite Your Tongue, it is not meant to give you permission, sorry folks, to say whatever you wanted to say whenever you want to say it. We can't do that in any aspect of our life, right? We talk with our friends with a certain amount of tact. We think about timing when we talk with our boss and so forth. So it's the same with our children. And there are many ways to communicate, and we can communicate through silences sometimes. We can communicate by doing something nice for people. We can communicate by talking. So I would say the full range, and I think you brought up this wonderful thing about text message. We live in a wonderful age where if one modality of communicating isn't working, we try another. And you just keep experimenting and working, right? As we always have, I think. And I think that's another point. You want to look back on what worked with your children, you know? When were the good times, you know? And what really worked? And some of those you can try again. Maybe they'll work. It's all an experiment. And no one has the answer. And what's really sad is when we figure out the answer, the child changes, the environment changes. You've been through that before. How many of you ever had 7 bottles of peanut butter and then your kid stopped liking peanut butter? Yes. Okay. So I think she was named.
One of the things I'm finding now is that I have 2 children. One lives in the same town as my mom. And so my mom is getting frustrated with me that my daughter is not talking to her. So I guess part of this is also defining our child, our relationship with our parents.
Absolutely.
I guess that's something that, you know, what do we say to our parents? You know, that we're trying to let our children be adults. So I feel like I'm the go-between between my mother and my child, my adult.
It's really interesting. I wrote this book very much from the parents' point of view. And I thought only parents would read it. I have had, of course, many of you here are very lucky still to be children, right? Adult children. And I have found that adult children have really found it useful to kind of look at their parents' perspective. So as you read it both from the child and the parent perspective. I think, again, you want your child and your mother, that generation, to begin to develop their own without you being the go-between. On the other hand, as I said, our relationships are always a mixture of choice and obligation. And we're going to come down on different ends of the continuum on what is an obligation. And this is particularly true for immigrant groups. So I, for example, might think it's very important to go to Aunt Betty's wedding. Because, you know, family is family and we go to Aunt Betty's wedding. Or even if she's 85 and whatever, married, okay. And my children might say, you know, possibly, well, you know, I've only met Aunt Betty once, you know, why would I want to go to Aunt Betty's wedding? And, you know, that has to lead to a discussion. And there will be lots of controversy about that. One of the things I do want to point out is that one of the things I'm very hopeful about is that because we are a society with lots of immigrants, we can really learn a lot from other cultures. In most cultures, parents don't send their kids away at age 18. That's a very North American kind of thing to do. You know, we can learn because many cultures, parents and children do live together, and it's not that it's any smoother that way either. I mean, there are tensions there too, but we can learn from each other.
I project pretty well. I think I can hear what I'm saying. Unless you really need to go. It's interesting, to your earlier point about adulthood being sort of a gradual process. I mean, you look at it from the perspective of our culture. We were living back in the early 1900s or the 1800s.
Right.
When change was so slow that you could be what your parents were, and you did actually make the transition to adulthood, then that's fine. You've made it, and you know,
right.
you've learned what you've had to learn. I mean, this I think is characteristic of what our culture is all about: such rapid change, such expansive thinking, that adulthood really becomes sort of a gradual process. And quite frankly, I'm not sure when I'm actually going to get there myself. But
absolutely.
That being said, I'm not sure I want to, but you know, it's the kind of a thing where, you know, you acquire a certain set of skills and we'll give you so much more freedom, and then when you get to 21, you've got more, but you still, you know, are learning as you move along. And to this day,
absolutely.
I still think, what would my parents do in a given situation? I recall a comment on Sunday one time that, you know, realizing one day that Mom and I didn't have all the answers. I said, that's an important realization. I said, from this point forward in all of our lives, we're going through it for the first time. All I can teach you is good judgment and hope that you catch on, you know. But I mean, I think that it's characteristic of what the actual culture actually requires, and I think we're adapting to it as we should. That it's an acquired set of skills that you gradually take on over time.
Absolutely. I think you've made some very important points. One is that we all are continuing to grow and to learn, and we really need to be forgiving of each other. Because we need to ask our children's forgiveness because we are learning and growing. And I was talking before at the beginning how much I have learned from writing this book. And here I am, 67 years old, still learning, still growing, and you know, hopefully you all are too. We don't have a choice because we've all had to learn how to, you know, use the ATM, and you know, we can just go on and all the things we've had to learn just to survive. So that's one really important point. And I think one of the freedoms of being and the advantages of being a parent of an adult child is we don't need to know all the answers, right? When they were little, I remember getting a stomach ache in the fall because was I making the right decision? Should they play hockey or should they dance? You know, what should they do? I don't have to make those decisions anymore. So this is a wonderful time of freedom where we don't have to have all the answers. So there are certainly pluses. I don't know what time you want to, yeah, we have a couple of more minutes. Okay, go ahead, yes.
I'll try it with the mic. Within our...
Okay, I think it's better if you use it, because...
We're keeping it for parents who couldn't be here. We can all be famous after we do. Another modality.
I'm interested to get your comments within our family context. My wife and I, we have three children, 28, 27, 25 young adults. And one of the things that we have noticed, and certainly I have as the father, is that mothers always quite often become the lightning rod in a family context where I think it's actually, from my observation, it's much tougher on the mother. And for me as the father, I suppose I have to just sometimes be very careful not to become a football. I'd be interested in your comments.
Well, even though I consider myself an ardent feminist, I did not study this from a gendered perspective. Certainly in many families where the mother had the most salient role in bringing up the kids, obviously that's going to, you know, the closer the relationship, the more fighting, right? We fight with our intimates much more heartily than we do with people we know less. So I would suspect your observation is true, that the most salient parent. I would also say that I think it's really important for us to begin to use the expertise our children now have. And of course, all of you have already done this. I suspect anybody ever called on their kid to help you with a computer crisis? Right, okay. So, and this is a wonderful thing. Again, this is our bonus, right? We've really worked hard. We've helped them get this education, and we can learn a lot. And I would say that my youngest child, who's 24, does say to me, you know, Mom, in your book you talk about giving advice but not expecting people to take it. But advice goes both ways, and it really makes the kids feel good and helps us when we do realize our children have a lot of expertise that we don't have. And one of the things they're experts on is their own times and the social mores of their times. And we need to listen carefully to what they feel the social mores are. Okay, a couple more, one more? Okay, one more. And
how does one respond when you're in this transition period, when you get something like, I don't want you to treat me in this adult relationship, I just want you to tell me what to do?
You know, I'd love to have all the answers, honey, but I don't, you know. That's the answer is, you know. No, I'm serious, that kind of answer. Okay, I'm going to end with just reiterating the last point, because I think it is so important to remember this. The last page of the book says just right here. Oh, I do want to say that one of the other joys of having adult children is our own freedom and our chance to do what we want. And that I'm finally in that after 35 years of active parenting, and I am loving it. I look at the clock every day at 3 o'clock and say, I don't have to drive anyone anyplace. All right. All human relations are ambivalent. The only complete relationships are those in which hostility can be expressed and the relationship maintained. So, I thank you all for attending. I hope you will enjoy this book.
There was a wonderful quality of concentrated listening going on here, which I think proves how effective and active your parenthood has been. Thank you for Ruth. She'll be able to sign some copies of books which are available to sale outside. We also have some comment sheets which we'd be very happy to have you complete and submit, which I'm sure have some very wonderful positive review comments to make, which Ruth will be very happy to see afterwards.
Yes, and I would also say that if you do read the book and if you like it, I hope you will not be quiet about it. You will tell everyone you know, and you know, you might put it on Amazon or whatever, Barnes and Nobles or whatever. So I'm so appreciative, because we all need help in life, and I think that's really important to remember.
Thank you all very much.